What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today we're going to finish up our discussion about the tribes of Rivals of Ixalan with the only one we haven't covered yet, pirates, and we're going to do it with one of our patented double deck techs. Haven't done one of these in a while. Oh, and by the way, I'll get this out of the way before I start the video here. Just because we're done with the tribes of Rivals of Ixalan standard doesn't mean that we're done with the deck techs this season at all, by far. There's still like 25 standard decks I want to talk about this season. Some I'm brewing up, some that are becoming popular on the competitive scene, some budget stuff. There's some popper content I want to bring to you. The next Pro Tour is modern, so there's a lot of modern stuff to talk about. And I might even have a couple of commander deck techs up my sleeve this season. So if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. Hit the bell for the notifications, because there are tons of decks outside of just the tribes that you want to see. But back to pirates for just a second. You might be asking yourself, why does pirates get a double deck tech? Well, a big part of the reason for it really is because I think Pirates just has the best budget deck this time around, and I really wanted to show that to you, but I also wanted to show you the competitive Grixis list that I've been working on that's really good. Grinds out games well, functions like a mid-range or a control deck depending on the situation. I like a lot about both of these decks. Like, I know it doesn't look like Pirates got a whole lot from Rivals. We didn't get a big spread of new Pirate stuff, but the Pirate stuff we did get is really, really good, and I think Pirates is a lot deeper than people give it credit for. You know, when this standard first started, I did a poll on both Twitter and Patreon. What deck do you want to see first, you know? And Pirates came in dead last on both platforms. So it's not getting a whole lot of hype right now, but I think low-key Pirates is actually super deep. So I wanted to bring you both decks. So without further ado, this is probably going to be a long video, and I've been babbling long enough already. Deck number one. Well, this first deck is only going to cost you about $40 to $50 on TCG Player. Not too much to pay at all, and it's a really, really fast, low-to-the-ground aggro deck that doesn't much care about what the opponent's trying to do, you know. We're just trying to goldfish a win on turn 4 if we possibly can, and there's a lot of different like sequences that can lead to it in this deck. It's just a classic aggro deck that just tries to win as quickly as possible. Now, to do that, we have to get on board as quickly and reliably and aggressively as possible. So we're going to play 14 one-drop pirates in this deck. But not to worry, both black and red have a ton of one-drop pirates that pack a decent punch. So let's look at these real quick. We're going to play 4 copies of Daring Buccaneer, 4 copies of Fanatical Firebrand, 4 copies of Grasping Scoundrel, and 2 copies of Rigging Runner. Now, Buccaneer pretty much comes down turn 1 100% of the time in this deck, provided you have them in your opening hand. I mean, we're playing like 30-plus pirates in this deck, so there's just no chance that we won't have another pirate in our hand on turn 1. And a 1-mana 2/2 is traditionally, and it turns out still, a very powerful thing to have. A Grasping Scoundrel is another 1-mana creature that can swing for 2 as early as turn 2, and having 8 of those is a level of aggression that you don't often see, at least in standard decks. So it's just awesome to have that. Even if the mana is a little bit tougher for Grasping Scoundrel on turn 1, I think it's still totally worth it to try and make it happen. As far as Fanatical Firebrand, this is the only one-drop we're playing that can't somehow get to 2 power, but I think it's still very much worth it, and I've really enjoyed playing with this creature. It can swing as early as turn 1. We don't have any other creatures capable of doing that. It can activate Raid even if you started the turn with an empty board. That is sometimes relevant. And it can mess up the opponent's combat math in numerous ways. You leave it behind on defense, swing with 2 or 3 other guys, and then suddenly your opponent has to kind of worry about blocks. It pressures the opponent's blocks a little bit. There's a lot of cool stuff about Fanatical Firebrand. I think it's worth playing all day. And finally, Runner. I don't want to play too many copies of Double R here, but I think it still has a place in the deck. Sometimes this will come down on turn 3 alongside a 2-drop, and that'll be a lot of board presence for you and a lot of power for very little mana a lot of the time. So I like a lot of what Rigging Runner can do, but we really don't want to see it on turn 1. We'd much rather see it on turn 2 alongside another 1-drop or turn 3 alongside a 2-drop. Now into the 2-drops here, I want to keep the aggression up, so I'm going to play 3 copies of Kari Zev, 4 copies of Dire Fleet Captain, and 3 copies of Fathom Fleet Captain. I think Kari Zev's a no-brainer. When you're building a fast aggro deck, she's a pretty good pick, and especially when it's built around pirates, you'll want to play you some Kari Zev. So I don't think that requires too much explanation, but there are some other 2-drops we could slot in here. Some of them are in the sideboard, and then others, like Dire Fleet Poisoner, for instance, I considered slightly too expensive for this deck, but we'll get to Poisoner later. Don't worry. As far as Fathom Fleet Captain goes, though, I think this is a great way to extend our board presence, especially on turns where we draw a land or something other either. That's just dead. You know, it's basically a way to draw a creature on a turn where we didn't draw a creature, which is really good. It's a mana sink, something else the deck really, really wants. So I like a lot about Fathom Fleet Captain. It's not the best pirate in the world, but sometimes when you can get, 2-3 pirates out of it, you've gotten a lot of value, and it's definitely worth playing. And as far as Dire Fleet Captain, I have always liked this card. It is not hard to get this thing swinging for 5 or even 6 sometimes. We've gone way beyond that in multiple games. I've got this thing swinging for 8 a couple of times. So as long as you don't get swept, this card is ridiculously good. And I know that it's a little fragile outside of your attack step and on your opponent's turn, but we really could not care less at all. We're a deck that's looking to profitably attack as often as possible, and that's what this card does. It puts in a lot of work when it comes to that. So we'll definitely play all 4 copies. And I got one more slide to show you to finish off the creatures here. We're going to play 3 copies of Ruin Raider, 3 copies of Captain Lannery Storm, and 4 copies of the best pirate payoff in this deck, Dire Fleet Neckbreaker. Well, a big part of our deck is getting to this 4-drop creature on time every game, as consistently as possible. And both Raider and Captain Storm help us do that in numerous ways. Ruin Raider can both draw us into that 4th land or just draw us into our Neckbreaker if we don't have it yet. And Captain Storm can obviously fix our mana. Even if we don't have a black source on board yet, she can both be the 4th mana that we need and be the black source that we need too. So I really like both of these, just for getting to Neckbreaker. And obviously Ruin Raider is ridiculous in this deck where most of the curve is extremely low. And our life total is a resource. We really don't care if Ruin Raider draws a Neckbreaker and we take 4. Against a lot of the decks in the format, we'll take that for our turn 4 setup where we just go for your throat. But as far as Neckbreaker goes, though, y'all, this is easily the best payoff this deck could ever hope for. The whole point of this deck, from a brewer's perspective, real talk for a second here, is to make Neckbreaker better than Hazoret the Fervent on turn 4. Obviously, Hazoret comes down, she swings up for 5 on turn 4, 95% of the time in the decks that she's in. Sometimes she doesn't, but those decks can pretty easily empty their hand that early. We have the benefit with Neckbreaker of not having to empty our hand. Usually we do, but we don't have to. And if we can get more than 5 power out of it on turn 4, we have bested the damage output of one of the fastest damage cards in all of Standard, which is a pretty cool thing to be able to do. We can easily get 6 or 8 power out of Neckbreaker on turn 4 because we've got all these 1-drops. That's one of the big reasons we're playing all of them, is so we can go like 1-drop on turn 1, then 2 1-drops on turn 2, or maybe the turn 3 2-drop and a 1-drop. We're just trying to drop as many creatures as possible so we get as much work out of Neckbreaker on turn 4 as we can. And I know that not every super aggressive deck is going to want to play 4 copies of a 4-drop, but it is definitely worth it to us, especially with the 3-drops that sort of help us consistently cast it on turn 4. It is very much worth it to us. In this build, at least, this is the best card in the deck. Now that leaves room for 4 spells. Hi, it's my face again. I missed you guys. But in any case, that leaves room for 4 whole spells, so we're going to spend those slots on Lightning Strike. And I don't really think that it's much of a choice here. We could play Shock if we wanted to lower the curve even more, and Shock would still provide some reach for us, but I'll go ahead and play the Lightning Strike. I'll do that. It's much more reach than Shock is, and it kills way more stuff than Shock does too. So we'll do that. Kind of a no-brainer, I think. Now there's 22 lands in the deck. No need to get too complicated here either. Just some dual lands, some unclaimed territory because, 34 pirates. Definitely got to play territory, and some basics aside from that. We get by on this really easily. Again, we've got some consistency in our 3-drops that help us get to 4, so we don't necessarily have to play all the lands in the world. We get by on this, and honestly, sometimes I think we could pull off 21. And here's our pretty simple sideboard. The worst thing that can happen to us is getting swept, so 6 of our sideboard slots are dedicated to both Duress and Kitesail Freebooter. I really don't like removal, obviously, and we also really don't like losing all of our creatures all at one time. Literally the worst thing that can happen. So we'll devote nearly half of our sideboard slots to making sure it doesn't happen. But aside from that, we've also got a Braid in there for the Godfarer's Gift matchup and to kill Heart of Kirin, because that's becoming a thing again. And Fiery Cannonade in there for other aggro decks. This can just be a one-sided Wrath that just wins us the game against a lot of other aggro, so we'll definitely play that. And Chandra's Defeat is also against other aggro decks, because Ramunap Red is just kind of better than us. It costs a lot more than we do, but it's just kind of better than us a lot of the time. So Chandra's Defeat can really help shore up that matchup, and even post boards in that match. It kills Glorybringers and Chandras and stuff, so Defeat is an amazing card, and it's only a quarter. We'll play that. And here are your power rankings. A final score of 60 on this budget deck, which is not bad for a budget deck. That's only going to cost you anywhere between $40, $45, maybe $50 if you demand near mint on every single card on TCG Player. That's not much to ask for. Again, I think like the single fastest deck in the format. This is a pure aggro deck that, again, is just trying to win the game regardless of what the opponent is doing as early as possible. If you're on the play, you can beat Godfarer's Gift before they cast Refurbish sometimes. Like, this deck is ridiculous. So I know that it's a little bit fragile. It's not super resilient. It's kind of bad after boards, especially against control. Even though we get Duress and Kitesail, they'll board in like 4 to 6 sweepers sometimes. So there are some things we got to worry about. We're fragile after boards, but we win game 1 as easily as any deck in the format. Try this thing out. If you're interested, it's really, really fun to play, and it's a super fun deck to goldfish even. But we're talking about 2 decks today, so I should probably move on to the second one, the Thinking Person's Pirates deck. This is Grixis Pirates. Again, I think the mana ended up working way better than I originally assumed that it ever would, and we get to play a really interesting deck. It plays kind of like a mid-range deck. It can play like a little bit like a control deck. There are a ton of removal elements in the deck, but there are still a ton of threats too. So I really like this deck. I like the way it plays, although it is a kind of difficult deck to play. There's a lot of ins and outs to this thing. So I think there's a lot of intrigue in it, and the correct build and the correct way of playing it is kind of up for grabs at this point. You know, there's a lot of learning when it comes to this build of the deck, but I think that it's got a really solid foundation. So let's go through it. Now, originally I was playing way more 1-drops in this deck than I ended up on, but we still wanted the 3 copies of Siren Stormtamer, even after cutting most of the other 1-drops. I briefly considered playing no 1-drops at all, but we've got a couple of pirates we specifically want to protect, and Siren Stormtamer can just be like, no, and like jump in front of removal and stuff, which can be really important sometimes. So, like a lot about Siren Stormtamer, and even when it's not specifically protecting freebooter or hostage taker or whatever, they can still get in for some damage, especially early. So I like a lot about Siren Stormtamer. I'm not going to give up my 3 copies. But let's bring the slide back so I can talk about our 2-drops here. We're going to play a lot of them. 4 copies of Direfleet Poisoner, 4 copies of Warkite Marauder, 3 copies of Kitesail Freebooter, and 2 copies of Direfleet Daredevil. Well, first, let's talk about Snatchcaster Mage here. I don't think we want to overload on copies of Daredevil in the main deck. We will fill out the playset in the sideboard because it's unbelievable against control decks and other decks that play a lot of spells. But we can get Lightning Strike, Harness Lightning, Abrade, sometimes Shock, Fatal Push out of even an aggro deck's graveyard. That can sometimes be really relevant because this is essentially nearly always at least a 2-for-1 because you'll get removal out of their graveyard, play on one of their guys, you'll get a body. Sometimes later on in the game, you'll play like a Glimmer of Genius out of Blue-White Control's graveyard, and that is a really good card advantage. You get a body and 2 cards, and you get to scry. This card is crazy. Let me just say that. This card is crazy in the right situation, but it's not good enough on turn 2 that we want to play a bunch of copies in the main. As far as Freebooter goes, I'll play 3 in the main deck here because in this list, we're not trying to be anywhere near as aggressive as we are in that first list, but we still want to hose control. You know, this can be a great game 1 way to get that Approach of the Second Sun out of their hand. And with Siren Stormtamer and some counter spells, we've got ways of protecting Kitesail when we absolutely need to. I just think this is a fantastic card that sees modern play, so if we're not trying to be strictly as aggressive as possible, I think we definitely want to play some main deck copies of it. Now, Warkite Marauder and Poisoner are the other 2-drops that we got from Rivals of Ixalan, aside from Daredevil. Now, Daredevil, I've already said, crazy card. I'm excited to talk about it. Some people are excited to hear about it, but Poisoner and Marauder are the 2 cards I'm most excited to talk about in this entire list. These were almost or exactly as good as I wanted them to be, at least in my experience. You know, Marauder is crazy. It essentially makes the last best creature they played completely irrelevant on our attack step, as long as it's out, which is great. If they've got another flyer out, it negates their ability to block. And Poisoner is maybe my favorite card in the whole deck. It's just so versatile. It's so crazy against a lot of stuff, you know. It can be played as a removal spell against non-indestructible ground creatures, which is like most of the format right now. It's specifically crazy against Bristling Hydra because it gets around hexproof, has flash, it's basically a removal spell during their attack step, and it gets around negate too. It's just like specifically meant for Bristling Hydra, but it kills like 90% of the other creatures in the format that people will be attacking with. Love that about it. It's essentially a 2-mana removal spell at instant speed. And even against control, it can flash in and block a Torrential Gearhulk sometimes. Play it against as a removal spell against that deck too. And against control, you can flash it in. It's a flash body, which is just relevant against control. And it can be played aggressively as a combat trick. Sometimes that +1/+1 can make a creature survive that wasn't going to, or make a creature trade that wasn't going to, which is just as relevant because, yeah, you'll lose your small guy they blocked with a big guy, but they'll lose their huge guy, and you still get to keep a body. Sometimes that's more relevant than the body you lost. So there's just so many awesome things about Poisoner. So many great ways to play it that can just lead to blowouts. So love Poisoner. We'll play all 4 copies definitely. Now I'm going to play 3 copies of Aethersphere Harvester in the deck. There's a lot to like about this card right now in Standard, and a lot to like about this card in this deck. We're playing a very light energy theme, mostly so we can abuse Aether Hub in the mana base. It's really important in this land base that we get to play Aether Hub. So this helps with that, and it can just get to swinging 3 in the air. It can block really well in the air too. It's, resistant to Glorybringer. That's super important right now. So I like a lot about Aethersphere. It's awesome against aggro decks too. There's just, Aethersphere is awesome. It's really good, by the way. This is a good interaction. It's awesome with Warkite Marauder, because again, even if they have another flyer that they can block with, then you're essentially just negating that flyer, swinging over for 5 every turn. That's what's not to like about that. So, Siren Stormtamer can easily crew this if it's got nothing else to do. Aethersphere Harvester is surprisingly awesome in this deck, and it doesn't tax the mana base as much as other cards, which is welcome. But to finish off the pirates in the deck, not necessarily the creatures, but the pirates, we're going to play 3 copies of Hostage Taker because why? Yeah, we're going to play 3. Why not, right? But Hostage Taker is just another piece of removal in this deck. I haven't actually gotten to all the removal yet, and I've already shown you a bunch of removal. Tirefleet Poisoner is removal. Warkite Marauder is kind of removal, especially combined with other actual removal cards. And this, again, straight up removal. So even just in our bodies in this deck, we've got a lot of ways to create tempo and remove other bodies from the deck, create 2-for-1s, and Hostage Taker is just that, a straight up 2-for-1. So we'll definitely play that. We've got Siren Stormtamer and other counter spells to protect it. It's just, again, another one of the best cards in the deck. We have to play some copies. But we'll finish off the creatures with 2 copies of the Scarab God, because we can make both blue and black mana in this deck somewhat reliably. So we've got to play the Scarab God as far as I'm concerned, because we've got like 21 creatures essentially in the deck. That is more than enough to consistently have a creature to bring back. And some of them are really good to bring back. If you've got extra mana lying around, it's crazy to bring back a 4/4 first strike Direfleet Daredevil that gets you a card, a removal piece to play or something. That's amazing. You can get back your Kite Sail Freebooter. You can get back your Hostage Taker with a Scarab God. There's just so many dirty cards to reanimate with bugs in this deck that we're definitely going to play 2 copies. But I mean, we're making blue and black, and we're trying to be as competitive as possible. The bug's in the deck, definitely. Now, this deck plays a lot more spells than the first deck, The first list was trying to take advantage of Neckbreaker and abuse, like, unclaimed territory. We don't have those to worry about, and we've got some non-pirate dudes, and we've got a bunch of really good spells we want to play. So, with that in mind, let me show you what we're doing. We're going to play 4 copies of Fatal Push, 4 copies of Harness Lightning, and 3 copies of Lookout's Dispersal. This is the only pirate payoff in this deck, actually, but I actually think this is one of the best pirate payoffs in all of Standard. Lookout's Dispersal just counters like everything at almost any point in the game for just 2 mana almost every time. We got 19 pirates in the deck. A lot of them are, 1 and 2 mana on our curve, so it's not hard at all to get a pirate in time to cast this in order to essentially negate a sweeper or a removal spell or a big creature they want to play like Scarab God or Hazaret, Glorybringer, whatever, It keeps us out of a lot of trouble due to sweepers and like big creatures that outclass our guys. It can also help us force through a Scarab God if we really needed to resolve, or a Hostage Taker, It can also protect Taker, protect Kite Sail Freebooter. It's just, Lookout's Dispersal does everything for just 2 mana 90% of the time. As far as push, I don't really think that really needs much explanation, We're playing black, we're trying to kill creatures. Fatal Push is the best spell in the format for doing that, so 4 copies, no matter what. But there's a really cool interaction with Harness Lightning in this deck. With Warkite Marauder, you just turn their dude into a 0/1, and then you Harness Lightning it. That way you can only spend 1 energy. You keep 2 energy to power your Aether Hub, and you killed the best guy on their side of the table. That's definitely a worthy interaction. And here's the mana base for this deck. We're playing 25 lands this time around. We're a lot more slower, a lot more controlling or mid-rangey. We really need our drops in this deck, and we don't have a whole lot of ways of getting them. So we want to play a bunch of lands to make sure that we hit our drops. I think 25 is right, and we've got well enough sources of each color in this deck too. And here's the sideboard for this list. You see the barrage of 2-ofs here, but we're trying to cover a lot of bases in the sideboard here. We've got 2-of Defeat, just like the first deck, serves the same purpose. Kills Chandras, Glory Bringers, smaller stuff on the curve that aggro decks play. Just Defeat is an amazing deal. We'll definitely play a couple of copies of that. Direfully Daredevil will finish off the playset against control decks specifically. This card is just unbelievable a lot of the time, so we want to play 4 copies against certain decks. Chart of Course will usually come in against control too, because we really need to draw cards in this matchup. We don't have a lot of ways of drawing cards, if you didn't notice. That's one of the deck's weaknesses. Usually control and mid-range want some way of drawing cards, but I just can't find a main deck way to squeeze Chart of Course into it. So, this will come in game 2 against slower decks a lot of the time, because winning the card advantage race is important in those matchups, or at least getting some card advantage. So Chart of Course definitely has a place in the deck. 2-of sideboard was as much as I could squeeze in, but it may be correct to play at least some amount in the main deck. Chart of Course is very good. We want to have some card draw, at least in the 75. Negate is in there against everything. I'd like 2 negate more than 1 negate in the last copy of Lookout's Dispersal, because negate will always counter Approach of the Second Sun, and that's really important. I've also got Lost Legacy. You'll note that I really don't like approach decks in this format. They're getting a little bit more popular. I love approach decks. I like to play with them, but I don't like to play against them with all these tribal builds that I'm building lately. It's really stressful, so I don't like approach. That's why Lost Legacy is in there. Over something like Duress this time around, I think you could still play Duress, and it might be correct to play Duress, but in this list, we can more easily make that black mana if we need to. So I think it's just worth it to just completely hose approach and numerous other decks. If we can hit the Scarab God with it, then we essentially become the Scarab God deck at the table. We'd much rather, be the only Scarab God deck at the table. So sometimes Lost Legacy is good for that too. Fiery Cannonade obviously comes in against aggro decks. We are not playing as many pirates, obviously, and we're not playing anywhere near as many creatures lower on the curve. Both of those things are fine, because even if we have a couple of pirates out, obviously Cannonade just gets better. We kill their whole board against aggro and leave a couple of our dudes out. That is a great situation. So rather than things like Sweltering Suns, which I think we could still pull off, I'll go with Cannonade for the blowout potential. And finally, Vraska's Contempt, because we need another answer to the Scarab God. We need another answer to Hazoret especially. Hazoret just does work against us if they resolve it, so Vraska's Contempt can be just a sort of catch-all answer to a lot of these stuff we otherwise can't answer. And here are your power rankings for this one. A final score of 66, pretty competitive and more or less on par with the other tribes that I've covered, but I think this is one of the more interesting decks of all of the tribe lists that I've done so far this standard, because it doesn't play quite like any deck that I've ever played. It's not really a control deck, not really an aggro deck, not really a mid-range deck. It's got elements of all of them, plays a lot of 2-drops like an aggro deck, plays, a counter spell like a control deck does, a lot of instant speed removal, plays, a good mix of creatures and removal like a mid-range deck does, but it's not necessarily any of those decks. It's just a really fun one to play with. Again, a steep learning curve for this one, but I think it's worth taking for a spin. But that's where the bad news comes in. A competitive deck comes with a price tag, and this one is about $235 to build on TCG Player. A lot of that is the fault of the mana base and the Scarab God, some important, sort of expensive stuff like Hostage Taker. But end of the day, though, I think this is very much worth playing, at least for the experience. And so you know what I've been babbling about for the last, 15 minutes? Talking about this Grixis list. It's a list I'm really excited for, and I think, again, plays like no other deck that I've played. So give it a shot. I like it a lot. And with that, I think I'm finally tapped out. My monitor cuts off at 40 minutes, and it cut off freaking forever ago. I can't even count how long ago my monitor cut off. So this is a long video. Hope you're still with me. If you are, make sure you like it. Just, it's the quickest and easiest way you can help me out. And I hope you want to help me out. I've been doing a lot of work for you guys already this season. So it's like 75-hour weeks. So help me out, even in the easy ways. Just click the like button. Put me in more recommended feeds. You can also sub if you're new. Again, lots and lots of decks still coming up, so don't give up on me yet just because we're done with the tribes. Sub if you're new, hit the bell for the notifications if you haven't done all that stuff yet. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev if you haven't done that yet, and if you wanted to view this deck list without having to watch this whole video again, both deck lists actually, you can click the first and second links in the description, and those will take you over to TCG Player. They help sponsor my content, and they also just happen to be the cheapest place you can buy either of these decks online right now. So hit either link or both links. Hitting the link helps me out. So that's another way you can, with minimal effort, help the channel. Just click the links, take you over to these two decks. You can check them out from there. And you can support me on Patreon if you really feel like it. Again, 75-hour weeks, you guys. So throw me $1 a month if you possibly can. And I'll let you know what decks are coming up the day before we do them. Valuable information. Do all that. But in any case, that's the Patreon spiel. I'm out for now. I've done all the YouTube stuff. Sorry I had to sit through that. But I hope you did, because I care about you. So, in any case, I think that's all I've got for now. Tapped out for this one, but I'll catch you later. Cats and all that. I haven't done it. It's been like 4 days since I've done a deck tech. I was out of town for a second, so kind of rusty, I think, a little bit. So, in any case, I'll catch you cats later. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. And by the way, don't say no cats. Julie's actually been down here the entire time. Hey, that's an incentive to stay through the entire video. You might see a cat. Julie's been down here the entire time sleeping on my lap because you're a good baby. Because you're a good baby. But anyway, bye, everybody.